it's just like, we're kind of, that sucks, not bad. It was just starting to get to be nice.
Yeah, right.
And now that we're not milking, it's really, for a farmer, for the most part, it's nicer regular time because,
All right, I'm going to call this meeting to order. Has the meeting been properly noticed, Carolyn?
It has.
Thank you very much. Before we move to public comment, I'm just going to reiterate some of the ground rules for the in-person meeting today. For those of you who are in attendance, please adhere to the following. Masks must be worn at all times. Social distancing of at least 6 feet must be strictly maintained unless next to members of your immediate household. To ensure 6 feet distancing, capacity is limited. And once we meet the capacity in accordance with Public Health Madison and Dane County requirements, we will restrict entry. Eating is not permitted, and please sit only in areas where permitted and as directed by ushers. And unfortunately, failure to abide by these requirements will result in a removal from the meeting venue. So thank you for abiding by these guidelines. And with that, we can move into public comment. For those who are here in person at this meeting and would like to speak, please approach the microphones at the front of the room here, and you'll have 3 minutes. I will ask that you will state your name and your address, and we will go from there. And when you're lining up, please maintain the social distancing. So with that, I'll invite anybody who'd like to speak for public comment. Hi there, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. My name is Ryan Geyer. I live at 173 Pinehurst Court here in Verona. As I mentioned, my name is Ryan. I am a father of 2 Verona School District students, one at Glacier Edge Elementary and one at Savannah Oaks Middle School. I'm here today to essentially beg that the Verona Schools leadership please stop finding reasons to keep our kids out of school. The data is beginning to pile up that indicates children need to be back into in-person school. And the data that I mentioned is not only coming from those at the highest levels of our government, but also directly from this school district. The failure rates among our high school age students are a direct reflection of keeping these kids out of our schools. My son finished all of his assigned work today, which is an asynchronous day, in under 30 minutes. That cannot be a reflection of every student must be successful. This district's report card is quite frankly unacceptable. And while it would be easy to pile on and point fingers with the benefit of hindsight, I'm going to choose to focus on asking for a solution rather than assigning blame. Dr. Fauci, our country's leading infectious disease expert, just yesterday announced that the CDC will be changing their mask guidelines from 6 feet to 3 feet very soon, which will essentially remove a significant hurdle and any further excuses about how to get our kids back to 5 days of in-person school per week. My wife, who's a board certified pediatrician, just sent you all a study published 5 days ago that showed that with proper mask protocols, a 3-foot distancing will not adversely affect the safety of either students or staff. This, coupled with increased access to vaccinations by teachers and school staff, should be enough cover for this leadership to prioritize our students' ability to access the education they deserve. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ryan. Welcome.
Hi there, Eric Bloomner. I live at 665 Basswood Avenue. I'm a parent of middle school child and 2 elementary school children in the district here. What I really wanted to talk about briefly here was just transparency. It's something that people have talked about quite a bit, but I feel like sometimes we lose sight of what it actually means. And I think number one, it means strong communication, especially in the times of a pandemic, and especially where the stakes are really high, like we've got a case right now. And then the process that's used to come to decisions really needs to be laid bare so that everybody, all the members of the public, can really understand what factors went into making a decision, how we weighed all the stakeholders' considerations. It's so important just to make sure that process is clear and communicated strongly. I think I really struggle with a plan that was communicated just hours before a meeting like this. I really think those need to be sent out earlier so people have time to review them, think about them, ask questions, talk with their neighbors, talk with different people. I think that's such an important thing here. And you have to invite the public into that discussion and in for that input. It gives the impression that it's done behind closed doors, and I think we can't have that. So I did have a little bit of time to look through that plan before this meeting tonight here. And one of the things I noticed that was missing is the kids. There was no mention in the plan about the kids. You know, echoing the previous commenter, what's the effect? What's the effect that this plan is going to have on our kids and their education? That's what we care about. That's what parents care about. You know, show us the data, show us the trends, show us the statistics for our kids. You know, we've seen data from other places. It does not look good. We want to know how this plan affects our kids. You know, so I really think we can get back to 5 days person in school. I think there's great data showing it. I think there's great public support for it. I think we can do an option for that. So let's make that happen. Let's figure out a way to make every single child in this district successful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eric. I'll invite additional attendees to approach the microphone if you have public comment.
Hi, Kelly Dolphin, 150 Pinehurst Court here in Verona. I'm gonna make this very quick. I mean, the reason we're here is about kids. Every single one of them, K through 5, 6 through 12, you name it, we're here for the kids. Every one of you here represents them. And I hope you guys can make a decision that's in the best interest of every single child in this district. K through 5 is not acceptable. We have 6th and 8th graders who aren't reading. Half of them are not reading at baseline right now. That is sad. We have Verona area school district, and half of our 6th or 8th graders cannot read above baseline. What does that tell you? We have 20% of our high school students right now failing. 20%, 1 in 5 are failing right now. That is so sad. It is tragic. We are a school district with so many resources. We have a brand new high school with so much space, and you cannot tell me that we can't get kids into school more than 2 days a week at 6 through 12. We are failing kids right now, and you're failing families. There's a reason 70% of people opted to put their kids back into school. It's because they think that's the best place for them. Thousands of school districts right now are operating 5 days a week, 6 through 12, K through 5, you name it. They're doing it. We cannot continue to hide behind whatever data we're looking at this point in time, because all the data right now that I see points to being in-person school. It is time to do what is right for the kids. I plan on keeping a tally tonight of how many times we use the word kid, because that's what it's about. That's why we're here. It's why we elected every one of you, is to represent what's best for our children. So it's time. It's time for our kids to go to school. 4 days a week, 5 days a week, we'll take it. But it has to be every one of them. Give people the option. People want to say virtual, that's great. I 100% respect that. But I know what's best for my kids. And so do others. Let us choose what's best for our children. So I hope tonight you guys can leave here feeling like you have succeeded for our children. Do not leave here with your heads down thinking, oh my gosh, what did I just do to half the kids in the school district? It's time. It's been a year. Let's see action. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kelly. I'll invite additional individuals to speak for public comment.
I'm Noelle Selin. I live at 637 Fairview Terrace, and I have 2 middle school kids and an elementary kid. And I just, first of all, want to thank all of you, because I know this is a very difficult year. I want to thank our administration and our teachers, because again, it is a difficult year. But I also want to speak in favor of bringing kids back 4 or 5 days a week and all kids. And that's really what we need. And like everyone has said, give people the choice, give families the choice. And I really feel strongly that our kids need to be back in school more than 2 days a week. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll invite anyone else who would like to speak during public comment to approach the microphone. Seeing none, I will move to the comments that have been submitted by email. The first comment is from Michelle Kipp, who writes, I wanted to write in for public comment for the upcoming board meeting. I have a couple of questions I was hoping you could address and thought others might benefit from the same information. How is a student masking being monitored and enforced, both in terms of proper wearing and proper quality? Is there a reporting mechanism other students, staff, and parents can use? Finally, is there a written policy in place to address repeat violations and escalation of consequences? 2, has there been any discussion about ongoing regular testing for the remainder of the school year, or perhaps as part of the next year's back to school planning? Something akin to UW's Safer Badger program, which would require a negative test before being allowed to use school facilities until proof of vaccination was provided. Thank you in advance. Comment 2 is from Vanessa Henze, who writes, please bring students back to the classroom. COVID cases are currently quite rare in Verona, and there is no reason to keep our school doors closed. We are hungry and ready for more. 2 days is not good enough for our kids. There are challenges our family cannot overcome because of our setup at home. We are struggling incredibly with the excessive screen time required for school. The teachers have been amazing and accommodating, doing the very best that they can, but I feel like I'm doing my kids a disservice when there are other more viable options just miles away. We have started to look into private schools offering full-time in-person. The current school model at VASD is not fitting our learning needs. We have 4 students in the district, and we are not prepared to have another year that looks like this one. Our family is privileged to even be able to think about private schooling. Not everyone has the means to do so. I know many families that packed up and moved their children into private schools offering full-time in-person. If our district doesn't take action, how many more will jump ship this fall? Our family will likely be one of them. Let us look at the disservice to our district and children, the families left behind. Let's talk about equality. Keeping our school doors closed is the most inequitable action we can take. Comment 3 from Jeff Becker writes, our kids are enjoying and benefiting enormously from in-person schooling they've been experiencing. It has reinforced with tremendous clarity that in-person learning is vastly superior to virtual and that we have a lot of ground to make up for the past year. I am inquiring as to why we have not announced plans to return from 5 days per week in-person learning across all grades. The science is increasingly clear that 3 feet of distancing is more than sufficient for kids of all ages, and that the virus has not been spreading via fomites. These facts, combined with a 2% positivity rate statewide and less than 1% in Dane County, and very low cases and hospitalization, supports a prompt return to a normal schedule at school. My family and the wider community would appreciate an update on this now and a clear explanation for any plan that does not include full-time in-person learning for all grades by Q4. The last comment I have here is from Carrie Ann Renland, who writes, first, thank you for the work that you have done to reopen our schools to some in-person learning and to allow some sports and extracurricular activities to resume. You have proven in a short time what many other districts around the state and nation have known for months, that in-person learning can be done safely during this pandemic. Second, I am writing to strongly encourage you to continue those efforts to further reopen our schools to in-person learning full-time for all VSD students, particularly those attending the high school. As COVID cases in our district remain minimal, the COVID cases in our county decrease, and the vaccination rates for educators and others increase, it is imperative to get our students back into school full-time. The negative impacts of keeping the students out of school are known and are not disputed. Virtual learning is merely a method of instruction. It is not a replacement for well-rounded public education. Please reopen our schools to in-person instruction full-time as soon as feasible. And those are all the public comments that I have. Seeing that we have no one else who has approached the microphone, we can move on to announcements. Are there any announcements from the board? And before we go, I think, as we've mentioned every board meeting, I certainly appreciate the comments that we've received from the public, both submitted by email and for those who have attended in person. And certainly the board continues to get dozens of emails and phone calls each week with folks expressing their opinions, and we certainly understand the gravity and importance of the situation for everyone. And as was mentioned, certainly our focus here is on the kids. So that's why we're all here. So appreciate your presence. With that, announcements from the board.
I'll go quick. So my mentoring organization, Dear Diary, held our first virtual This Is Her Space conference on Saturday. And we had 55 participants at our conference. 23 were middle and high school VASD girls, which was really exciting for us. Of those, we awarded scholarships to high school seniors who participated. So 6 of our Verona high school seniors received $200 scholarships on Saturday as well. So I know that this is a heavy meeting, but that was really exciting for me and my team. We were very excited to see so many Verona students because we typically don't see that in our programming. So I thought that it would be fit to announce that before we started our meeting today.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Anna. Other announcements from the board? Dean, any announcements from you?
None for me.
Okay. All right. With that, we can move to board business. We'll consider approval of the consent agenda. We have personnel items and meeting minutes. Is there any discussion on individual items in the consent agenda? Second call for any individual discussion. Last call. Hearing none, I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda. If there is not an objection, this motion will be approved. Are there any objections? Last call for any objections. Hearing no objections, the consent agenda is approved, and we can move to item B of board business and review the school phased opening plans for fourth quarter. Dan, I'll kick it to you.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to draw on the team members with me this evening also for various aspects of this. So what I want to direct your attention to, board members, is the updated presentation that I sent about 5:25 this evening. So let me get this up here. And I believe, Tamara, you have that one on deck. Is that correct? Okay, let me get here too. Sorry. Okay, so, all right, just make sure, board, that what you're looking at is, it says updated 03/15/2021 school update. So update to the update. All right, and I'm going to go through this slide by slide. So first, what I want to do is talk a little bit about the structure of the update, and this is similar to what you've seen in the past. So we'll talk a little bit about attendance, we'll give you a vaccination update, Public Health Order 14 on gatherings and protective measures, plans for the fourth quarter for elementary, secondary athletics and activities, and plans for summer school, and then for the 2021-22 school year. So what you see here in this picture is the vaccinators that were part of the vaccine clinic that we hosted at the high school, and that is courtesy of Fitchburg Family Pharmacy. We'll talk a little bit more about that. There also, the fellow on the far right-hand side is from Fitch-Verona EMS, and he was present during all of the clinic in case there was an issue with somebody who was having a reaction, adverse reaction to the vaccine, which did not happen. So a little bit about this. So it was held on the 6th of March. And again, in the upper left-hand corner, the fellow in that picture is Thad Shoemaker. And I just want to call him out specifically. He's the owner and operator of Fitchburg Family Pharmacy. And I hadn't met him in person until that day. We talked over the phone about a week beforehand. And I hadn't stopped in his store before 9 days before this clinic. And so they were just bending over backwards to help us. And they offered this clinic at our high school for 60 of our staff members. We, of course, filled it. And there were many first and second year pharmacy students who were qualified and certified as vaccinators who helped out in that event. So I just want to say thank you to Thad and his staff at Fitchburg Family Pharmacy for making this happen on very, very short order, just a matter of a few days. And then the lower left too, I just want to call out that Fitrona EMS had a person here for the entire time, just to be on watch for anybody who had an adverse reaction. And we're happy to say that that did not happen. So in the next slide then, slide number 5. So at that March 6th, we had 61 staff that went through. They also provided for some staff at Leopold Elementary School on the 11th, and also GHC hosted a clinic for VASD staff on the 8th of March. We had 109 staff vaccinated there. And many staff members also went out on their own to get vaccinated through Walgreens, other places around the state. And then, of course, Alliant Energy Center started last week on the 9th with the Johnson & Johnson, and several of our staff members got vaccinated there. So while we have not been asking the question of staff who's been vaccinated, I am certain that everybody who has wanted to get the vaccination has had an opportunity to do so, and either had shot number 1, or in cases of Johnson & Johnson had their only shot, and or have a scheduled appointment to do so. And as we have done in the past, this is our updated attendance. So we didn't include the other slides that we did the last time. They're not going to change that much, but we did want to provide this update on the attendance. And Evan is here if anybody has any questions from the board.
Did we ever check to see how attendance and like the F rates at the high school correlated?
I'm just checking with Lori because they were looking at F rates. I don't think we have that right in front of us, so we're happy to up that. If we do an update to the board, which we typically do during the week, we'll add that in if we have that. Any other questions on attendance? That's a good question.
Okay, so since the last time we met, Public Health Madison has published their latest order, order number 14. And it had significant changes to mass gatherings and to protective measures requirements. So before we get into that any further, so this is 14 orders since May 13th of 2020. So is that right? Yeah, 2019. So 14 orders. There will be a 15th and a 16th before we finish the school year. So the reason I mention that is all of these orders have had an impact on school operations, and there's 14 of them to date. 2 more to come before we finish the end of the school year. But this represents a lot of change, and some of that easier to do than other changes, but they've all had an impact on our school operations. I'm not sure there's another county in the state of Wisconsin whose health department has issued that many orders in that short a time period. So if you note a little bit of frustration in my voice, there might be some because, and we viewed them as a partner in this whole past year, but it hasn't been without its challenges, that's for sure. So just a little bit of review on order number 14 in terms of gathering limits, and Joel will talk a little bit about this later on as it pertains to athletics and activities. And this is just a little bit of a side-by-side from order 13 to order 14. And clearly you can see that it's opening up from what it had been. So that's a step in the right direction, in my opinion. Another big change was, and this is almost impossible to see from out in the audience, and I apologize for that. This is literally a red line version from order number 13 to order number 14 in terms of protective measures. So I want to highlight the arrowed pieces. So in number 3, that new language there that isn't redlined or is redlined is ensuring employees with face coverings are at least 6 feet from others to the greatest extent possible. So that eliminated the requirement for students to be physically distanced. You might recall that under order number 13, the requirement was 6 feet to the greatest extent possible. So that greatest extent possible language, it did not mean that you engineer situations where you knowingly put students and staff within 6 feet, but that the greatest extent possible was a nod to the fact that you couldn't guarantee that 100% of the time. The other arrow on number 9 is, again, this is a change to the protective measures so that when 6 feet distancing is not possible for students, ensuring that student employee groups are as static as possible by having the same group of students stay with the same employees as much as possible, restricting mixing between groups as much as possible. So this is really talking about cohorting. So it really is talking to, if you're not able to social distance, then really restrict how much mobility there is between cohorts. So at the secondary level, that is nearly impossible to do. At the elementary level, it's very possible to do, and we've been doing that for the most part for the entire school year, K through 2 in particular. So that represents the big change in order number 14. Then the next slide is the right-hand side is the language from order number 14. So you can see that manifest there. It all talks about wearing masks and face coverings. So that hasn't gone away. And that employees maintain at least 6 feet distance from other to the greatest extent possible. So that's employees. And then number 3, it's talking about students when not possible, then cohort. And then it talks about common areas. So on the left-hand side, the revised order retains physical distancing requirements for staff, but not students. Distancing of less than 6 feet permissible of cohorts kept as static as possible. And then we'll start K through 5 back full in-person Tuesday through Friday, as those classes are already cohorted. And then the 6 through 12 students transition to a modified Wildcats hybrid model. Now, I want to go through the next a couple of slides here, and then just have the board hold your questions, because there is an update to this that is important. So at this point, I am going to turn this over to Angie and Lori to talk about the elementary 4th quarter plan. And Angie's coming to the microphone. Angie, you can move the mic up also, so you don't have to lean down to talk into it.
Good evening.
But talk into it, though, otherwise we won't be able to hear you.
Good evening.
Perfect.
All right. So the elementary plan includes option 1, students will attend 4 days a week, 7:30 to 2:30. And one of the big things that we really want to emphasize is that there will be no changes to current classroom programming. So students will remain in their same classes, and we will just merge the 2 cohorts together. We also want to share that our special education in-person, concurrent, and virtual options will continue. So students will still receive their special education services. And if there are adjustments that need to be made, then our special education coordinators will work with families to coordinate and update and adjust those IEPs. Our choice and charter school programs will still continue with their current programming, and our in-person students will attend 4 days a week, the same as our neighborhood schools. When we look at our next slide. Can I ask a question about some of this before we move on, Dean? Or do you want us to hold all questions?
If you could hold just for a little bit, please. Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you.
So then, as we summarize this, we will continue to cohort. So our students will continue to work in their smaller groups, and we'll cohort in our common spaces as well as our classrooms. We will certainly continue with social distancing. Students will be required to wear masks. And then we will continue with our other mitigation measures. And as I said earlier, there will be no change to the current classroom placements. And then we will continue with 4 days as of right now. And so that's the summary of our elementary, and I'll turn it over to Lori and she'll share with you secondary.
So our secondary planning will continue very much similar to what it is now to maintain cohorts. Wild and Cats cohorts will continue to attend on the days that they're attending right now, so 2 days per week. We will be adding Mondays as an instructional day for all students. So our Wildcats groups will attend in person on their scheduled days, and then alternating Mondays, we have a calendar schedule that we would share with families. Mondays will be a late start schedule that allows for some additional planning time for our teachers and professional development. Classes will begin at 10 a.m., release at 3:30 or 3:35. Our virtual only students, option 2 students, will continue to participate in concurrent instruction, including the addition of Mondays as an instructional day. Our principals, student services staff, and our teachers have been doing a wonderful job with outreach. And so we will have criteria for determining if students need targeted outreach and or virtual only students could benefit from in-person instruction. We would take a look at credit deficiency, failing grades, and then principals would be sending out invitations to families to see if they would want their children to attend in-person school. Similar to what we did during our PLUS opportunities, we extended invitations. Some families accepted the invitations, others didn't feel comfortable having their children attend in person. So in summary, our updated plan adheres to the updated public health order. We'll maintain social distancing, masking, other mitigation measures. We are not able to cohort completely at the secondary level. Our schedules do all allow for reduced mixing and transitioning during the day. And this is because our older students are more like adults in terms of transmission. Social distancing helps mitigate the outbreaks. And we're thinking about a lot of those end of the year activities that our seniors in particular need to participate in. So public health orders don't change in terms of close contact identification and quarantining requirements. So we're also thinking about things like graduation and AP testing. So having more students in could expose them to becoming a close contact and needing to miss out on some of those end of year activities. This increases our in-person instructional time and still allows for targeted assistance for certain students.
So we'll get to the update. So that was the flow of the thinking as recently as earlier today. So what we've learned throughout the last year is that things change and that things change very quickly. And that is challenging and frustrating and presents opportunities also. So as Ryan had indicated earlier in his comments, there is a recent study from the state of Massachusetts about 6 foot versus 3 foot. And that has been a barrier for us for sure for bringing kids in more than a hybrid model, just because of the physical distancing and the space required to do that, not just at our high school, but our elementaries and middle schools as well. So in fact, there is a growing body of evidence that points to 3 feet being as efficacious as 6 feet in terms of the mitigation of the virus spread if proper masking is taking place and other mitigation measures. So a recent interview with Dr. Fauci, I think it was either yesterday or maybe earlier today, that certainly was indicating that Dr. Fauci was indicating that CDC recommendations on distancing changing those requirements was imminent. Of course, couldn't put a date on that, but that it would be forthcoming soon. The change in the public health order reflected in order number 14. I'm just going to back up a little bit here if I can. So board members, if you want to go to that slide, I think it's slide maybe 9. Yes. So slide 9, the language in number 9 is almost identical to what is currently in CDC guidelines. And they have drawn heavily from that. And DHS has also, but they've been a little bit slower in catching up with that than public health. So the reason that that's important is because I fully anticipate that when CDC changes their language from 6 foot to 3 foot, that public health will fall in line with that. Now, when that happens, I don't know. And time is of the essence as we're coming close to the end of the school year. So I'm going to go back to, sorry for this back and forth, slide 15. Okay, summary. There we go, update. So again, why that's germane here is that public health almost certainly will change their language to reflect whatever the CDC language changes. Now, order number 15 will take effect on April 7th. We know that orders are 28 days separated from each other. We can also reasonably anticipate that they will fall in a similar pattern to the last one and issue that about a week before. And if there is a change to CDC guidance, they may carve out a special piece for schools because they know that this is an important factor for all schools in Dane County. So what we're going to do then is the model that Lori just walked through with you through, we're going to put that on hold for now. And we're going to check with the team tomorrow to see how long can we hold and why is this important? Well, for one reason, one of many reasons, our high school, we have furniture crammed into every nook and cranny in that building, which will take a considerable amount of time to relocate. Joel can speak to that because a lot of it's taking up space in his locker rooms right now. So, and we can't hold for very long because we're not a huge organization, so we don't need months, but we're not a tiny organization, so we can't do it in hours or days either. So our plan for then communicating to the K through 5 parents is, as we've detailed with you this evening, the Tuesday through Friday full in-person, maintaining the virtual. So we'll communicate that to parents, caregivers, and staff tomorrow. And then we'll also communicate to parents in grades 6 through 12 that we're going to remain status quo for the time being, awaiting further guidance and recommendations from CDC and or PHMDC. So with the hope that we can open that up for kids 6 through 12 full in, also Tuesday through Friday. So I'm going to stop there and see what questions the board has.
So Dean, Lori referenced the quarantine and close contact language. Do you anticipate any of those things changing with the next order? In other words, how a close contact is defined and what is required of a close contact in terms of quarantining?
I don't see a change coming with the next order. I do see a change coming with that for next fall. But I don't see that for this next order.
I had a question about the K-5 programming. Given that at all the area schools, if you're in option 2, you are with an option 2 teacher. And so by doing this, we'll be alleviating a lot of stress on staff because now they'll only be teaching in person or they'll have a couple of kids who might be out because of quarantine.
Are we gonna, but that's not true at the choice programs for TWE and the other charter programs. Are we gonna offer option 2 families an ability to come back in if they're more comfortable to help ease some of the burden on our staff?
Right now, for our students in monolingual programming, we are not going to offer that. Because our choice and charter programs are a little bit different, we'll need to take a look at what that would look like. Right now, I haven't had a chance because we wanted to present this plan here to present this with our TWE teachers. We've taken a look at how many students are in option 1 and option 2 in each grade level, and it's very different across each grade level and across schools. So how we will plan to accommodate that so that students are able to continue with their programming and reducing the amount of stress on our teachers is something we'll have to continue to look at.
Okay. Are you going to be talking to the charter, like the other charter schools then to find out for them as well?
Yeah. Yes, we will.
Okay. And then you had talked about the special ed students. Are they, so if they normally only are getting support on the 2 days they're in, that'll go up to 4 days because now they'll be there 4 days? Is that the intention?
So special education students, we will certainly look at their IEP, and so their minutes will be adjusted accordingly as their IEP dictates.
Okay.
Other questions?
I have a question. For, I think, I don't know what slide it is, slide 13 on the plan, you have targeted outreach for students, for virtual students who are credit deficient, failing, or invited by principals. Can those options also be available to any student who is credit deficient or failing or invited by principals?
Amy, I can speak to that. Last week, Friday, I met with the high school administrative team just to talk a little bit about attendance, about data, failure rates, et cetera. And I want to let you know that there are over 600 students at the high school who are receiving some kind of additional support because our staff have really stepped up in very creative ways to meet student needs. Some of that has included things like mandatory office hours. Some has included virtual students coming in person on Mondays. Some has included staff members who are willing to case manage students to work outside of our school hours and meet with students at their convenience. So yes, the types of outreach that are happening, there are multitudes of outreach happening right now, and that will continue.
Thank you.
To piggyback on that question though, when we had the presentation at the CIA, one of the big things they talked about was that half day that's offered on Mondays to virtual only students and others to come in to help get their grades up. With now not having Mondays to do that, where are staff supposed to find the time to do that? Because this is a big change. And a lot of those families may not be comfortable bringing their kids in on a Monday now when there's a whole group of kids there.
So the high school schedule will be changing. They've been on the Q3, Q4 schedule. The 0 hour goes away for fourth quarter. And what I know our high school administrative team is taking a look at what teaching loads are looking like. Some teachers had a heavier teaching schedule in Q3 than they do in Q4. So they're taking a look at when academic resource support would be available to students during the school day, similar to what was happening on Mondays.
So do we know what the amount of time of supports were being offered right now versus what it'll be in Q4?
Not at this time.
Lori, to the point that you just made, does that mean that only some of the teachers have that extra time? Or is that, like, is it pretty standard that most of our teachers have like an extra period for time for planning and whatnot?
Without looking at teacher schedules, I'm not prepared to answer that right now.
Hey, Lori, another high school related question. So I know you addressed whether there's possibility for a student or their family to make the decision to move from an all virtual to an in-person if they feel at this juncture comfortable with that. What about at the high school level? Is that, I know that there had been talk in previous meetings of there being that possibility for in particular instances, like if a student's really struggling and we're trying to improve, performance and think that maybe in person might help and the family is willing to accept that invitation. But given the movement in vaccination and possibly with these orders, will there be additional opportunity for students who had picked virtual to then possibly for Q4 move to some in-person?
We are not planning on offering a new choice to open that possibility up for families. In essence, we asked families to make a commitment for the semester, and we will continue to work with the percentage of families that chose option 1 as in-person option, and option 2 will remain virtual.
I just want to make a comment and I understand that answer. I guess I just want to make a comment from my perspective. If we can act with empathy, if there are some students whose, families have been able to get vaccinated and there's a feeling that their risk tolerance would allow, at least from my perspective as a board member, I would like us to have empathy in allowing people to switch. I know we asked them to make a commitment. It's really tough to make that decision in light of all the changes that have happened in our nation, state, community. And, being optimistic, vaccination may have gone better than people anticipated. So I would just like us to be empathetic, especially, I know, for example, a senior student who would like to move from virtual to in-person. And as a district, if we can give that senior the last 8 to 6 weeks with us and they want to be in person, I would want us to have the empathy to do that.
I appreciate that perspective, Christina. At the elementary level, what that would entail could be a change in teacher assignment at this point in time. Given the importance of relationships and the relationships that have been established over 3/4 of the year already, changing teachers at this point in time, while I understand and understand that perspective,
yeah, I think
it doesn't seem to be recommended.
I'm meaning to talk about secondary versus elementary, but particularly at middle and high school level is what I was thinking, but thank you for that clarification.
And I would say at the middle school and high school level, as we just heard Dr. Gorell explain, our plan is currently on hold, and pending what the new CDC guidance is and or public health updates with social distancing, that would help inform future plans. It makes a huge difference when you think about being able to cohort students and how much you can distance students if that distance is 3 feet or 6 feet. It's been really hard to ask families to make commitments without having all of the information and knowing how much things change over time. So I just want to echo, Christina, your degree of empathy. It's very hard to ask that of families, knowing that everybody wants their own child to benefit from their best schooling they can possibly get.
A number of affinity groups meet on Mondays. So I know like at Savannah Oaks, the MSAN groups meets on Mondays. That was a big part of the presentations we saw at CIA from both the high school and the middle school, was how important those groups were to outreach and to help keeping kids engaged and successful, even if scores weren't showing it, at least they were participating. How are we going to be able to do that with the 5 days, and how are people, and especially the middle school where they don't have the 0 hour to get rid of?
I would say those affinity groups would take place during the WIN time, and we still have time in the schedule where we would be able to meet with groups.
Okay, but not everybody is able to attend all the WIN times because of how the schedule's been laid out.
There are also advisory times in the morning. I also know that our middle school staff, similar to our high school staff, have been doing a tremendous amount of outreach. They've also been surveying their students weekly to feel how their students are doing in terms of sense of belonging and having trusted relationships with adults. So that qualitative data has been very positive, and I know that our middle school administrators will continue to ensure that students are able to meet with the groups that help them feel that sense of belonging in school.
Other questions, comments?
Yeah, I'll start with I got a whole bunch of notes here, and I was trying to figure out what order to go in on it. So I'm going to start with on August 8th, 2018. I'm a farmer, and we got like a foot of rain around here. And it became the toughest 2 years of my farming career. I had to do things I've never done. I never ever thought I'd have to do. And I'm not blaming our staff, but that's what our staff, I feel that's how I feel the staff must have been dealing with for the last year. Like, so I can empathize with the staff that that this has been a dang tough year and a lot of things out of their control, like I had with farming. Looking at some of the reports, well, maybe I'll just, there's no secret to anybody. I view public health not as a partner, but as an adversary. I've been after them since July. And, schools all across the state are open. Some magical barrier happens here in Dane County. Okay, now CIA had some testing / tracking. I'm not exactly sure what to call it, but that to me suggested that some of our children have had a lost year of education. And this plan that I've just seen, I see no urgency in that plan to try and fix this, what I perceive as a lost year of education. So I have a great deal of concern with that. And this isn't an issue of staff that I'm going to talk about. I think some people from those reports or testy or whatever, I get a sense that some people / families / kids, I don't know who it is, are using virtual learning as a tool to allow them to be truant and maybe not be in classes and stuff. And I know it's just so much harder for staff to keep track of kids that aren't actually physically in the school. I'm not blaming the staff for it. I just think some people are using the system not to their best advantage, in my opinion, but they feel it is. So those are just some of my broader thoughts. Since you're up here, Lori, how is this plan for 612 going to improve student outcome? I just don't see it.
Well, Tom, that's a difficult question for all school districts to respond to. I can tell you from the administrative perspective and from the staff perspective, we do feel a sense of urgency, and that's playing out every single day in our schools. Our teachers have had to learn new systems, new ways of teaching, new schedules, new technologies, and they've done so every single time we've asked them to. That isn't easy. And coming out of this pandemic, there are systemic issues that are impacting our families in tremendous ways. Tremendous ways. And when I talked to our high school administrative team last week, they shared some of the stories of our students who are Option 2 students, who are facing things that many of us have never had to face in our lives and are still logging on to Zoom 3 and 4 times a day while doing things that adults don't have to do to keep their families afloat. So what we're facing in schools goes far beyond school walls and is going to take far beyond 9 weeks of instruction to remedy. So we need to start thinking about what we're putting in place right now, additional supports we're putting in place, what summer school can look like, and how we change up our planning, thinking about the future. And all of those things are things we're talking about right now. But I can assure you, Tom, there's a tremendous sense of urgency and frustration, because I would love to be able to come before you and say, here's how we're going to fix things. Here's a plan to fix things in Q4. And that just wouldn't be true, because this is very complex and we have people facing very complex issues that have nothing to do with virtual learning.
And this is the last comment here. It is my understanding that this is going to be our last chance to change things for what I feel is the better for parents who want their kids in school. And I sure hope everybody, I know everybody in this room is going to give it their fullest thought and expression. I am absolutely in favor of the kids in school more. I think it's just been successful across the state and multiple school districts. And that is what I am looking for, as a plan that gets the kids back in school. Thank you.
Dean, I have a couple questions for you. I'm assuming because the timeline on the secondary plan has been put on hold, it would be put on hold because if there was a change in the distance requirements at public health level, or honestly at CDC level, if there was a change at the CDC level for distancing, we would adopt that change, and that would, in essence, allow us to be bringing back our 6 through 12 full-time, or all of them at one time. We would be able to accommodate that?
Correct. Yes. So assuming the CDC changes their stance on the 6 foot, 3 foot, predicting that PHMBC would follow suit, we would change and then open that up for 6 through 12 students. We would still retain the virtual option as we have. There would still be concurrent teaching going on, but we would open it up for students to come back. So we wouldn't be doing the wildcats.
Okay, so I think that makes sense. That answers my question on that. In light of that, I would ask that first of all, we use CDC. We have a very short timeline.
Mm-hmm.
Public health is reactive to CDC.
Agreed.
So we can go ahead and follow CDC, and I think be fully in compliance with the spirit of what public health would be advocating for. So I would hope that we're taking the earliest advice we possibly can. Is that fair?
That's an accurate statement.
Then if that's the case, and I'm assuming that if we've even put a plan on hold, there's a sense that that is a strong likelihood that that could be forthcoming in the next couple of weeks. Would you, I mean, I know you're guessing at this point.
I'm guessing, I'm hoping it's sooner than that.
Okay. In light of that, I'm concerned that we're asking staff to plan on, because I would agree, if the distance requirement is reduced to 3 feet, we move.
Mm-hmm.
Can we put all of our energy towards that? If we start discussing the Mondays, that puts a limiter on our ability to bring kids back full time at the upper grades. And I don't see that there's a strong benefit to kids for those Mondays in person. If those Mondays can still be reserved so we can continue targeting our outreach to the kids that have been identified as needing some extra help, or affinity groups, or win time, all of the different things that are going on. And honestly, we've all heard at CIA, there's some really fantastic things that are happening at our middle schools or high schools that don't always get up to the board level and then don't get transmitted out to the community from the board table, but there's some really fantastic work that's going on. If we can keep those Mondays set aside as for the staff to keep those days, to continue that outreach, to continue planning that outreach, because I don't want them to have to halt planning because there's uncertainty. If we can keep those days set aside, that helps us stay more flexible so we can move whenever we get the go-ahead.
Sure, right. So I think I'm tracking with you, Meredith. So the plan would be to move forward with the K through 5, as we've described tonight, to stay in the hybrid, but not indefinitely, right? Because we want to toggle into that as soon as we can, but that would reserve the Mondays exactly for what you're talking about.
Yeah, I think, so K through 5, I think we have a great plan that isn't going to be impacted by a change in distancing.
Correct.
Okay. So it would really be just, we keep Mondays set aside across the board, K through 12, but the 6 through 12 staff and admin, they don't have to worry about possibly losing Mondays, not losing Mondays, or we've removed that uncertainty. We're just keeping Mondays reserved for staff to do targeted outreach, because I really don't want to lose any of the targeted outreach that's going on, because I think that's so critical. Not all students would come back in person, not all students would stay virtual. This is really where we want to make sure that we are using intentional outreach. And I think we're doing it, we're really doing that at the upper grades. So I don't want to lose our Mondays, but I also don't want to lock in where we can't be flexible. So I think, making sure we can, for 6 through 12, take the Mondays off the table, because we are going to move as soon as CDC says we can. Is that?
Yeah, that's all accurate. And that's what I'm trying to communicate here, is that we'll put that on hold. The wildcats and then alternating Mondays will just retain the wildcats for a short period of time,
So,
praying that CDC issues their new guidance sooner than later.
But given,
oh,
sorry, go ahead, Colleen.
So, I mean, I've been pretty quiet because the new update now, I don't know what my questions are anymore. But if for whatever reason the new CDC recommendations don't lean towards what we're thinking it may lean towards, let's just say hypothetically they keep the 6 feet and all of that, I would still be I would still want us to either like to keep the plan we have right now. Like I'm still hesitant about if they don't change the recommendations, then the plan is the plan we saw before this slide. And the Mondays was a thing for me. I'm also a little bit worried about, I've been very vocal about my opinions about concurrent teaching, and adding Mondays as an alternating day and still keeping concurrent teaching. I feel that we're sending the message that virtual education is no longer a priority, it's just in person. And we also know that many of our students of color are our virtual students. So with that, with us focusing more of our attention on, now we're bringing more students in person for that Monday, which used to be a planning day or PD day. Now that's an education day. It's cutting some time for our teachers, and it may not be all teachers, but for some of our teachers. And that's now giving less time for planning and prepping for virtual instruction and or concurrent instruction, which again, we've seen in our CIA meetings, most of our students who are virtual are students of color, and they're not doing very well in the district either. So I'm worried about, if for whatever reason, the CDC doesn't do what we're hoping they will, or what they're saying they might do, are we going to then just keep where we are right now, or are we going to go to this alternating Mondays schedule?
Well, that's the administrative plan, is to go to the alternating Mondays schedule, because what we've been hearing loud and clear is a desire for more in-person instruction. And so that alternating Monday is a way to introduce some additional in-person instruction, and understand that everything has a trade-off. I understand that. It would be a late start Monday so that the prep time, some prep time for the 6 through 12 is still there, but not to the extent that it is now.
So
go ahead.
I was going to just say, so thinking about the trade-off in my opinion cannot be virtual learning, because we have students who are going to opt into that, and we can't take that choice away. I think that those have been the families that are less vocal, and we talk often about how important it is for us to remember the families who aren't as vocal. And I know that there have been a lot of people who are very vocal about in-person, and I understand why they're vocal about in-person. I think we all can agree that we want our students in school, but not at the expense of decreasing the value of education our virtual students get. I can't agree with that messaging, especially knowing that our students of color who are struggling most are those virtual students. And we just can't make families pick. Like, we've looked at many of our students of color live in households with multi-generational families. They are students who just can't come to schools. Their families are being impacted by COVID at alarming rates. I've seen it in my own family, and it's difficult to make somebody make that decision. We can't, our virtual education cannot be our trade-off.
Dean, I think what I'm in agreement with Yana. I question the utility of the Mondays to our students in general, just across the board. The every other Monday, I'm not sure offers significant amount of academic benefit across the board, as opposed to the what it can take away. I think for myriad reasons, maybe the utility of the Mondays is in question, at least for me, and it sounds like for Yana. Again, I would prefer that we keep Mondays off the table, because if CDC, for example, isn't forthcoming as quickly as we'd like, but they are changing the plan or changing their guidance, in April, I'd still like to be able to move to adopt what their recommendations are. If we've implemented the alternating Monday, that's limited our ability to do that. So I think there's I think several multiple reasons, maybe that the utility of Monday is up in question right now.
So just to summarize some of the feedback I'm hearing from the board, the ongoing targeted outreach, ramping that up, continuing that work is critical. I'm hearing generally that there's a thought that the trade-off between continuing with that work and utilizing Mondays to ensure that staff have adequate planning to meet the needs of both virtual and in-person students, that risking that work for an additional alternating day every week, that trade-off might not be worth it. Is that correct? And so a focus on what we presume to be the changes in CDC guidance, which could allow for 4 days of in-person, rather than having 3 plan options, it's 2. It's either the current model with increased, outreach, or the 4 days. Is that fair to say? Anyone who objects to that?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to add something because this was something that was discussed at CIA. So, and I think it's been touched on at previous board meetings, but there is a push for in-person, but I think backing up what Yana said, there's a disproportionate representation among virtual learners of some of our most struggling students, of our students of color, our ELL population. So sometimes there's this push that just increase in person, that will help the most struggling students, or that will improve failure rate, or that will improve this academic achievement that I agree is alarming. And by the way, it was alarming before COVID. So I don't think many people realize when we look at CIA data, those disparities in achievement have existed for years before COVID. And they show a great inequality in our district between how certain groups, populations of students are performing. So if you looked at like ELL data, especially prior to TWE, you'd probably find it pretty alarming. There's been disparities for a long time, well before COVID. So I think what we're saying is those Mondays, if they can be used to the greatest degree to reach those students who perhaps are going to remain virtual, they're disproportionately represented right now in the virtual population, and we don't have any signals that's going to change radically. So we need the staff to have the time on Mondays to do whatever it takes to reach those. And as I said, I would love it if someone who was virtual now suddenly felt comfortable enough or had a family situation that allowed them maybe to introduce them in person. But I can't change all of the barriers. And I need to recognize that, COVID has disproportionately affected some of our students more than others, some of our families more than others. It had much more drastic effects on certain populations. So we need to be recognizing that. And then I think what we're saying about the Mondays is that is a really important time to protect for staff to reach those types of students who we may not see in person, even if we offer more in person.
Yeah, I would also say, just thinking about, I know that we are also looking at, we are ramping up vaccines, which is great. I was able to get vaccinated, so I am excited that we are ramping up vaccines. I also want us to acknowledge that Wisconsin DHS put $6.1 million towards outreach for communities who do not trust the vaccine, which are typically the communities that have been impacted most by COVID. So thinking about, vaccines could be a solution for us, but there are a lot of communities who that is not an option. They are opting out of vaccine, and that is their choice for them to opt out of vaccines. But we can't use that as, now that we have vaccines, more students will choose to come in person, or more of our students of color will see them more regularly, because that's not necessarily the case. And our state recognizes that, and many states recognize that and are putting money behind trying to vaccinate those communities as well. So, I'm glad that vaccinations are going well, and they continue to go well, a lot better than we even expected. But we can't just use that either as our answer, our solution for, like, we're going to be back to regular sooner than later.
So I have a clarifying question around timeline. And let's say that at the end of this week, the CDC comes out with their 3 feet guidelines. They change from 6 to 3. would it be the administration's plan to, under the same timeline that was presented today for Q4 for K through 5, pursue the 4 days in person for 6 through 12?
That would be the ideal, Noah. So,
So in other words, I just want to say the plan would not be to wait till the April 5th board meeting and then delay the implementation. I think everybody here would be in favor of authorizing or affirming that, swift approach.
yes. So, on this slide behind you, and what slide is this? Slide 16. So, in the document that was posted on board docs, it had in the lower right-hand column, it had the Wildcat hybrid Monday that got switched out just prior to this meeting to a TBD. So the goal would be to start everybody the same. Unfortunately, we don't think we can do that at the beginning of the Q4, but the next week after that. So remember, we have spring break next week, and we also have a Good Friday in there also. So we'd be looking at starting that on the 12th. So the 12th is actually Monday. So that should be the 13th on the Tuesday through Friday piece. And then again, depending on how quickly CDC makes their change, we'd like to marry that up with the K through 5.
So just so I'm understanding, you're saying that basically, as long as this comes out prior to 4/12, we'll have K through 12 back 4 days a week.
Well, I can't say prior to K-12 because, we're not a huge organization. We don't need months to do things. We're not a tiny organization. We can't do it in hours. So we have to build in time for, if nothing else, moving furniture. We have furniture all over the place in all of our middle schools and our high school. We need time to communicate with parents. So I will not say here tonight that if we hear about this change on April 11th, we can activate it on April 12th or April 12th. Yes.
Go ahead.
So to that end, I need to meet with the team tomorrow to see what a reasonable time frame is.
So I would just push to say, we talked on March 1st about moving furniture. We need to start moving the furniture now. And if it never gets used, it never gets used. But I don't want us waiting until we hear from the CDC to start moving furniture. That's something we could be doing now.
In some cases, that's correct. We don't want people tripping over it either, because there are some specific instructional designs with the way that the furniture is laid out currently. So that be part of the conversation I need to have with the team tomorrow.
Hey, Dean, one comment for the elementary. So we, that part of it, we seem pretty firm is going forward, and that doesn't have to rely on any changes by anybody. That K through 5 is the plan that works now. Is there the possibility of having more outdoor? I've had several people ask whether with the weather changing, the spring, with nicer, warmer temps, for example, lunch is, a worry for some people. Is there a possibility of having tents outside of elementary schools where some students could eat outside, or teachers could take advantage of nice weather to have a lesson outside, for example? That's something that as a board member, I would be in support of, giving the staff some opportunity to use outdoor spaces as the weather gets better, and especially in a crowded, lunchroom environment. I'm just thinking of, my youngest attending Glacier Edge, and I was there multiple times at lunch, and I know that lunchroom gets quite crowded. So I would just say, if that's an additional comfort for some people to be able to have the child eat outside, and or help comfort for staff, if anything we can do to facilitate that, I think would be good.
I was also going to ask, if we can't move furniture now, is there any way that we can get help from parents to move furniture quickly? We have really vocal parents who want their kids in school, so help us move furniture. If that's, I'm just wondering, I want us to look at solutions and not, what can hinder us. Like if parents come in on the weekend when there are no students there and only 5 of them can come at a time. I don't know, but I don't want us to limit like what our staff capacity is, because I'm sure we will find people who are willing to help us if we're needing help moving furniture. If it has to be like moved overnight or 3 nights or whatever the timeline is.
I'm not going to suggest child labor or anything. But when Badger Ridge, which is now Sugar Creek, opened, they literally had the kids grab their desks, walk across the yard with them.
If we give parent permission, I think
it was
we're
in
okay.
January.
They did do that.
So, I mean, I think being creative could help, is all I'm saying.
Sure.
Being creative. I was very surprised when they did that, but I do remember it clearly.
You remember correctly.
So Dean, I know we're still, the timing is still an issue. That's something that you'll be working out as, with your team, with the team, and we'll be hearing more. I just want to be clear about what parents can kind of expect and what staff can expect, and clear in the murky world that we're in right now. Staff knows that they will have their Mondays from here out.
I want to be clear with the board. Is that a board directive? I'm hearing it as such. I just need the board to say it as such.
So I would say it is not a directive, but what the board is charged with is oversight and providing feedback. And I would say that this is strong feedback regarding Mondays. And if it is the administrative plan to move forward with alternating Mondays, a demonstration of why that is worth the trade-offs that were mentioned around virtual learning and outreach. Maybe those trade-offs don't exist, maybe they do, but I think there's expressed concern and there's feedback, but it is an administrative decision, as it has been for months.
And then, but following that, so then if we're saying that teachers staff will have their Mondays, we're then also saying, and I'm trying to clarify, are we also telling parents that of 6 through 12 specifically, if and when CDC says 3 feet, we will move to 3 feet in the timeliest fashion possible?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Correct.
And if that happens to come at a time, yes, let's say it comes on April 11th, we're still in a position where we will move forward with that.
Yes.
Okay. I think that helps clarify some of my questions. And I hope that helps lay out a little bit for staff what to expect, what parents can expect.
I guess my one hope would be that some different feedback that a variety of people gave would be that if the CDC doesn't come out with something, I would hope we're moving very strongly towards the things that I think Lori talked about, of doing targeted outreach to ask people to come back for 4 days where they can and where we think it would most serve the students, and not worrying about what percentages we're at in the classrooms, and instead focusing on really meeting student needs.
Is there anything that would preclude us from doing that now, though? We have the flexibility currently. Could we continue to work towards bringing students back that need that targeted outreach, knowing that we may reach a point where everyone will be able to be brought back? And
I believe that's happening currently. So Lori made reference to some 600 plus high school students, and I imagine that's happening, maybe not to that same degree at middle school, but I believe that's already happening.
Correct. Targeted outreach and invitations for in-person learning has been happening ever since November when we started with the Plus. It has continued in different forms as we entered second semester, but yes, we have not broadly communicated that because with the social distancing requirement, we are not able to bring everybody back who may want to come back to school. So that has been specific invitations that our principals have extended to families or case managers or special ed supervisors, et cetera.
Thanks, Lori. I'd like to reiterate just what I had said earlier, but it bears repeating. We've heard from the high school and we've heard from the middle school staff, and there is work going on at that level, at those levels, that just doesn't make it all the way up to the board table as often as it should. And it's really some fantastic work that the staff is investing their whole heart into. And so that's something that I think we really need to be we need to recognize from this level. We've all seen it and we were quite impressed. And so this is certainly not we want staff to do more. We want to recognize what they are doing. We also are looking to see how we can move forward, but this really needed a minute to recognize the great work that's happening.
I appreciate that, Meredith. I know our staff does too.
Lori, I just wanted to say too, I'm cautious. I would like to caution folks that like to throw out, kids are failing, you got to get them back in school. That's an easy answer to a really, really complicated question. And I really struggle with that as a parent. And I know our students are doing things that adults do. They're taking care of their families, they're taking care of their siblings, they're doing the laundry, they're in charge of little ones, or they're working full time. These things are so hard, and no amount of effort on our part is going to fix that, because kids can't focus on learning. Who cares who the 37th president of the United States was when my family doesn't have enough to eat? So I want to caution us and our families for using standardized data to say our kids have lost an entire year. They've learned a lot this year too, I'll tell you that. They've learned how to cope. They've learned how to deal with stress. They've learned how to reach out for help, because we have amazing staff. And for that, I want to tell our staff, thank you, because they need to hear it, because our parents are not saying that enough to them. Thank you for all of you do.
Amy, thank you so much for raising that point. I think you bring up a good one. I want to reiterate, we feel a sense of urgency when we look at data. The data that we shared at CIA, I made a mistake when I shared that data. And I know that I communicated that it's one data point, and data is always the beginning of a conversation, not the end. And we never make decisions around one data point. Our teachers are collecting data all the time in terms of how students are doing in their formative assessments. They're also checking in with students on the Rhythm app to see how they're doing with their social emotional wellness. We have outreach happening. And like I mentioned earlier, we have surveys going out, climate surveys, where we're getting qualitative data. And so I regret presenting only quantitative data to you, because Christina, as you mentioned, we've known what the trends are in our quantitative data for years. And I don't know why we would expect those trends to change during a global pandemic.
Yeah.
So I think the question is, what is that other data that we need to be looking at that Amy just alluded to? What are some of these other data points? And I regret not showing that to you to show a more complete story, because when you look at STAR assessment data in isolation, it can create a sense of urgency and alarm. And it doesn't mean that that isn't merited. It just means that's one data point that tells a very imperfect story when you don't seek out other data points. So it's not to dismiss what we see in those trends. It's not to say we don't take that seriously. It's to say it's one consideration, and it has to inform a long-term plan, knowing that we're also looking for some short-term gains for our students who need the most supports.
That I appreciate that comment, and I think I agree with everything that Amy said, except I would say the one area I take issue with is that the barriers that our students face are things that we can't do anything about. I dispute that, and I think, and it's not that I say we as a board or as a school district can do it by ourselves, but I think that the outrage that I see in our community about some of the disparities that exist, the newfound outrage, I think that needs to be channeled for years to coalesce around our students who are struggling and have struggled for years due to the barriers that they face that are no fault of their own. And so I would charge the board, this board, the future board, and the future administration with gathering business leaders, gathering parents, gathering community nonprofits, and coming up with a comprehensive plan to address these issues, because we know that food security affects our students, access to transportation affects our students, access to healthcare affects our students, the employment status in their families. That's all critical, and we absolutely have an interest in that. And so I hope that my hope is that we do come up with a really comprehensive multi-year plan to address this, because there no doubt will be an exacerbation of the issues that we have seen for decades. And so I'm glad, I think that there is an attention to this and an urgency around it, and it needs to be something that, as you said, leads to both short-term and long-term plans. So other questions or comments? I think we'll be talking about summer school and next school year too in this presentation at some point. So
I just want to thank you, Lori, for bringing up the conversation we had at CIA. And, you know, it's hard in a committee meeting to go over all of the factors that lead to those disparities, right? It's hard for us in a committee meeting to really be able to even define all the inequalities that our students deal with and that bear themselves out then in academic achievement data, which of course existed well before COVID, but have been exacerbated by COVID. So I appreciate you mentioning, and you know, I don't blame you for not having explained all that background around the data, but we certainly have future CIA meetings, so we'll have more time to talk about qualitative. But I know our staff knows the stories. When you talk about the high school staff meeting and knowing the stories of individual students and barriers and challenges that they have had during COVID. So those are the things that don't show up on the page, right, when you're looking at the data, but the stories of the struggles and the things that some of our students face. So.
I was just going to say to Amy's point and Lori's point, you know, you mentioned there are students who are doing all of these things and then still logging on to Zoom and still making sure that they're getting work done. And I think that is why I am continuously pushing for, we can't get rid of at best, like our best quality of virtual learning. And the trade-off is in person, right? Because there just are some things that our students just can't control. And if we do that, then we're saying like, you either come in person or you come in person, you know? And so we acknowledge all of the hard work that our teachers have put in, all of the hard work that our admin has put in. You know, as we review all of this stuff, we're like, we don't know what decision to make sometimes either. It's a back and forth for us as well. You know, but I just think that as we decide on whatever it is we're going to do, just making sure that we don't forget about some of those critical pieces for some of our other students who virtual works, and it allows them to do what they need to do for their families, as well as get, you know, the education that they're trying to still get without them just missing, right? Because we've also seen, you know, for some of our students of color, they just don't come. You know, we've seen that in the past as well. And so this does allow them some opportunity to get some stuff done, or I can look at my homework later on tonight or review the lecture later on. You know, so we do appreciate all the work that is happening. As I mentioned in our last CIA meetings, I think we start asking a bunch of questions and then everybody feels like we're not on their side. We're all on the same side. I think it's just difficult for us sometimes, for all of us to find the right answer, right? Like we're all looking for the right answer, whatever that answer is, right? But we are on the same side, and we're all pushing for our kids to get the best education possible, and whatever, you know, that answer is, we're all looking for that. So we're on the same team. I know sometimes it doesn't sound like it, but we appreciate all the hard work. We know that it's been a very frustrating year for everybody. You know, and as we're making these changes, just trying our hardest to make the best change and as minimum changes as we can, given that things change every day.
I'd just like to tell you, Lori, that I'm not the most eloquent speaker in the world. And I do appreciate what everybody has done, because I've lived those hard decisions in farming that I know you guys have made. I'm just incredibly frustrated with the outcome that we're getting in Dane County. So I got a question for the board, and I believe it's 14 states have said we're completely open. And I know most of this state of Wisconsin schools are in person all the time. I know there's a Dane County public order out there, but I also know Belleville and Waunakee are moving forward, despite what public health is saying. And I know some board members here are uncomfortable with that. I am not. I am not one little bit uncomfortable moving forward without public health.
Shocking, Tom. We have no idea.
So I guess my question is, are you guys ready to move forward without public health?
When I
that's
said
what
earlier,
Mary
if
said,
CDC says that it's 3 feet, then we move. Whether or not public health is caught up, they're reactionary to CDC. And as soon as CDC makes the call, then I'm comfortable that we move.
I'd actually be comfortable moving faster if our medical advisory committee said 3 feet was good enough. If they were ready to do it before CDC because they've taken the look.
I think ultimately at this point, it is an administrative plan and there are nuances around logistics and changing our operations. And what I've heard tonight is that as CDC changes their guidance, that the administration will move as quickly as possible. So that's where I'm at. Other comments or questions before Superintendent Grell continues with the presentation?
I think when it's communicated to families, Dean, if you can just reiterate the other mitigation things that we have done are staying in place. For example, the mask mandate remains in place. The attention to, just the other things we've been doing, traffic patterns in the buildings, keeping cohorts apart, like at the elementary level. Because I think for some people, the change from 6 to 3 is going to cause them pause. So the more we can do to reassure that the other mitigation protocols are being followed. It's still not just, going back to pre-COVID operations. There's a lot of very intentional things we're doing.
I've also heard some concerns, gotten emails about Mondays, and there's not a lot that's understood about what all is happening on Mondays. Lori mentioned a lot of things tonight that our teachers and staff are doing and focusing on Mondays. But if you could connect some of those dots for families so they understand all of the efforts to help children who are struggling, as opposed to just having another day off for the teachers, because that's not what it is.
All right.
Okay. Tom, I'm wrestling with whether or not I address your urgency matter. I think I'm going to pass at this time. Maybe pick it up a later time. Okay, just a little bit on logistics. So transportation, again, maybe the big point here is that for anybody who knows anybody who wants to maybe think about being a bus driver, send them our way. But right now we have the adequate staff to transport. Under the proposed Q4, I don't believe that will change under this modified one either. But we'll stay tuned there. So Badger Bus has been doing great work for us. They've been very accommodating. And again, if anybody, this is no joke, even though it sounds like one, this is no joke. If you know of somebody who may have the slightest bit of interest in driving a bus, please send them our way. And then we do have some late buses that are up and running at the high school. That's been an important piece for us in the past, and it is now. Otherwise, some students are just not able to participate. Under buildings and grounds, so they're preparing for the athletic return, and Joel's going to talk a little bit about that here in just a bit, and also repositioning schools for an increase in student attendance. Child nutrition continues to do their miracle working with providing all the meals. Obviously, more students in the schools will create another challenge, but they have shown us time and again that they are more than up to that. And then staffing. So for those staff that had accommodations under ADA, and as they have started to receive their vaccines, they'll be able to rejoin us. And then also too, the CDC guidance on quarantining for people who are fully vaccinated is very helpful in terms of substitute teachers and not needing as many, but we will still retain all that we have through the end of this year for sure. So Joel, you want to talk a little bit about athletics and activities?
Okay, so I think this is not as complex as everything else we've been talking about. This is pretty straightforward. So
Wait a minute. Could you make it more complex, please?
I mean, I might need to, but no. So really, I talked about the change before with sports. We're going to be at mass gathering limits now. We've already been, a lot of our sports have already gotten going. We had a swim event that you were there at, which is very, very cool. And we also have, football is starting this week with a scrimmage, things like that. So the biggest limitation that we have is less about our student athletes, because they're pretty much back in motion right now within COVID with masks and all that, being able to practice. Biggest limitation is just the mass gathering limits, which impacts fans essentially, or the size of our events. So for certain events, for certain sports, for example, football, that there's a lot of athletes from both sides that are participating. Our ability to have more fans is limited versus the swim event. We're able to allow more guests inside. So I'd probably say that is really the biggest difference that we have compared to my other presentation. I don't want to spend too much time talking about all that, since I think that's all pretty straightforward. So it's really just the mass gathering limits there, the 350 indoors and 500 outdoors. That's what we're going to be working with there, and adjusting how many people are inside at one time. And that involves a little bit more in terms of controlling who is coming into the building, with having to get guest lists, not only from our own fans, but also from away fans as well too. And we have someone who checks off each person that walks in. Our custodians are doing a great job, especially indoors, in terms of identifying seating and making sure that people stay 6 feet socially distanced the entire time. Same as we talk about flow as they enter the building and as they leave. Outdoors is a little bit easier, just in terms of flow. It's pretty straightforward there, and obviously to mitigate certain things is a lot easier in indoors now. But so far so good, and it's ever changing, as Mr. Grell mentioned before. So depending on what changes, we'll adjust as well too. The hope is that our limits will increase. That's kind of where we stand.
Hey,
So
Joel, go ahead, Tom.
Just a quick question on use of our facilities. Where is the football team practicing?
They're practicing at the facility.
No, I mean, are they practicing
Everywhere.
Are they practicing on the stadium field?
Correct.
I mean, mostly because I'm asking it because that was a big thing when we put the artificial surfaces in, that come March, when you got nice weather. I never planned on it for spring football. I promise you that. But I just really emphasized to people that those artificial surfaces were going to be golden in March and early April.
Absolutely. That's been the biggest thing. All schools even schools with turf were struggling with there was a lot of snow. So our grounds crew had to communicate with a lot of other schools that had turf as well too, to try and see how to clean it. We have learned a lot ourselves in terms of trying to stay on the cleaning of the snow throughout the snowfalls. We let it build up too much. A lot of schools did. So we had a lot of work that we had to do to kind of clean all that off. But now, obviously, it's snowing today, which I'm not too excited about. But football, they've been practicing out on the turf field. Soccer is going to get going soon. They'll be practicing as well on their turf fields. Cross country, obviously, we can't clear a cross country course snow wise, so we're just hoping that continues to melt. But they've been managing what they can. We've been kind of in rotation with them being able to use a track, for example, staying within mass gathering limits, and making sure that they don't cross paths with football and things like that. So I think really the biggest thing is our student athletes have been able to use the facilities, especially the facilities that were designed to try and counteract bad weather and those type of things. One thing I emphasize too is, the last thing we want to do as a community, put a lot of money and effort towards these great facilities, and we want to maintain that. That was kind of the biggest hurdle that we had to cross when we talked about cleaning of those fields. Because turf, as long as it can last, it can also be damaged very easily when you talk about the removal of snow. A lot of people think that you can just take equipment and clean it off, and that couldn't be further from the truth. I've learned that myself too. So, it's an ever-going process to try and clean that off. A lot of our other fields, we can't even touch because you can't really take heavy equipment on grass or whatever it may be to clean those off. So our grounds crew is doing a great job trying to navigate and figure all this out. But the fact that we do have turf has allowed us to get going when we were supposed to get going. So that's a big plus.
So you're saying the board made a really good decision at one point in time that we could hang on to now. At one point, we made a great choice.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
That's what I heard.
I'm going to follow that up with a positive note. So I just want to do a shout out about how well planned and how intentional the traffic patterns and everything was at the swim meet. So we had our first home girls swim meet, and I think it went, from my perspective, I was taking photographs for the team, very well. I mean, the spectators were separated. They all had their numbered seating where they were going. I mean, I heard from several people that they felt it was done very well in terms of keeping people distanced and allowing it to be an event that was memorable and without worry because of the really good planning. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. And I want to thank our aquatic center as well too, because they attacked that one. That's a very difficult area to navigate as well. And as I said, being indoors is tough. So thank you for that. And I just want to push that thank you to them as well too, because they did a lot of work preparing for that. So.
All right. Thank you, Joel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So, oh gosh. Sorry, what happened here? So Angie, do you want to talk about summer school? Lori, who wants to talk about summer school?
Given the snow that we have outside today. So we're excited to share that this summer, we're going to offer for elementary, there'll be 3 opportunities. So session 1 is a 2-week session. Session 2 is a 2-week session. And then there's session 3, which is 4 weeks. So we will start July the 6th. And so that first session will run 9 days. And that's July 6th through July 16th. And then session 2. And then session 3, the longest, the 4 weeks, is July 6th through July 30th. And then secondary, session 1 for them will begin June the 21st. And that's where we will be able to offer our extended learning opportunities. So students will receive an invite to come in June. And then there'll also be a second session. And so that's where students can come in for a 4-week session. At the secondary level, offering a session in June and a session in July will allow us to expand our teaching capacity, because we were concerned that with everything going on this year, that perhaps teachers may not want to teach this summer. And so we're excited to say that we offered an interest survey, and we have several teachers, several teachers. We were pleasantly surprised at the number of teachers that do want to teach this summer. So our elementary and our secondary sessions, and then, well, that's it. I was getting ready to go into the 2021-2022 school year, but you all didn't ask for that. So you all asked for summer school. So questions? Thank you.
You have to work on that wait time a little bit there, Dr. Hawkins. You know, Madeline Hunter would be upset with you. So, and then going on to 21-22 school year, again, what we're forecasting is that we'll be in person fully, 5 days a week, no hybrid, normal schedule. But remember, normal schedule includes late start Mondays, everybody's favorite. So that's the forecast for next year. And I'm happy to say that with Dr. Clardy in the background there. Okay, so any remaining questions from the board?
Dean, I just wanted to make a comment. I know it came up, the urgency to get kids back in school, so I wanted to speak to that. I know for sure that you are feeling an urgency to get kids back in school. And I want to just also thank you for all of the work that you've been doing on the vaccinations that's going to enable our students to be back in school and keep our teachers safe. You've had the unenviable decisions of balancing urgent student needs, staff safety. It's been Herculean, and there's no right answers that are to be found anywhere, but I appreciate what you've done. And again, I think the vaccination effort that you have truly spearheaded more than most people would even know has been extraordinarily beneficial to our entire student body, to our staff, to keeping our community safe. And so I just want to point that out and say thank you.
Thank you, Meredith. I appreciate that. Anything else? All right, well, that concludes that presentation.
Right. Thank you very much. We can move on to item C and consider approval of the total package wage settlement of 3.25% for confidential, technical, and supervisory staff.
Vicki, do you want to come down and say a few words about items C and D?
Love to say, but Noah beat me to it. So yes, we are hoping to move forward with the board's support. If you approve a total wage settlement package of 3.25 for our confidential, technical, and supportive team, and we would begin to process that at this time.
Questions or comments from the board? Any motions?
I'll make a motion to approve that package as it's written on the request here from the administration team.
I'll second.
There's a motion from Tom and a second from Amy to approve the total package wage settlement for confidential, technical, and supervisory staff. Any questions or comments before we vote? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by aye.
Aye. Aye.
All those opposed? This motion carries. We can move to item D.
At this time, administration also requests that you approve a total package of wages for the administrative team of 3.25% for the 2020-21 school year.
Questions or comments from the board? Motions?
I once again will make a motion to use the wording that the administration has put forward.
Second.
Is that a second from?
Yeah.
There's a motion from Tom and a second from Yana to approve the total wage settlement for administrative staff. Any last questions or comments before we proceed with a vote? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
All is opposed? And this motion carries as well. Thank you very much. Superintendent's report?
There are no items under the superintendent's report for this evening.
Okay, thank you. We can move to future agenda items and meeting dates. Any questions or comments from the board on that?
Noah, you brought up something interesting in response to Amy about kind of what we do for the community. It would be really good. I don't know that I've ever seen, but a report on what the Wildcat Fund, like how much money they bring in, what we do with that money. I think it would be interesting because we do a lot more than just this.
Great. Yep, we'll add that to the list.
We can sure do that. That'd be great to do.
Excellent. Other questions or comments about meeting dates and agenda items?
Did we decide on our police contract for next year? I know that we had mentioned we'll look at it again soon, but I don't know if we had set a date for soon. I'm just curious.
So, Dean, feel free to jump in.
We have not, Yana.
Okay.
So Corey Saffold and I have met with the police chief, Verona police chief, and the city administrator twice. We have one more meeting coming up to work through that. And then we'll likely get in a closed session to talk with the board about that.
Okay, thank you.
And that could be as soon as the next meeting too.
Okay.
Other questions or comments from the board? All right, hearing none, we can move on to committee reports, CIA.
So we have met twice since the last meeting. We met on the 3rd, we met on the 9th. There were extensive discussions. I went ahead and forwarded a bunch of documents that were reviewed at those because I don't think I can do all the documents justice in a summary. So all of you should have received that in email. The only other one that I'll need to send, I just couldn't find it at the moment, is on the 3rd, we talked a bit about AVID. Actually, that took up a big chunk of the meeting, which you'll remember as a board was an investment made in the last budget cycle to start up AVID. And that was a very informative presentation about how AVID targets learners kind of in this middle band and provides some really great programming. And just what is top of mind from that meeting, Lori, is the excitement that the staff that had stepped up to work on Avid, to spearhead Avid. You could just, even on Zoom, I mean, this was a Zoom meeting, you could feel the excitement that they have for this program. So for me as a board member, that's what really sticks in my mind, is that a program that has that much staff buy-in, I would feel is a good investment. So we'll probably hear more about that because this was just an introduction to what's happening with Avid. But that was the first meeting. And then the next one on the 9th was a lot of data, which I sent you documents for. A lot of achievement data, STAR data. And so you can go over all of that. And we are going to have an upcoming CIA meeting where we talk more specifically about math curriculum. That was something that the community and also board members are interested in hearing more about, but we didn't get to that with all the other data that we were reviewing. So I would say, like I said, I can't do all the data justice. So, look at your email and we can go from there, or we can answer more questions.
Great. Thank you very much. Finance, BG&T.
Has not met.
Okay, thank you. Personnel and policy.
Has not met.
Thank you very much. And with that, I will accept a motion to adjourn to closed session under Wisconsin statutes 19.85, parent 1, parent C, to consider employment, promotion, compensation, or performance evaluation data of any public employee over which the governmental body has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility regarding assistant superintendents.
So moved.
Second. There's a motion from Meredith and a second from Tom. Any last questions or comments before we begin a roll call vote? Hearing none, we'll start with Amy.
Aye.
Carolyn.
Aye.
Christina.
Aye.
Meredith.
Aye.
I will vote aye as well. Yana.
Aye.
Tom. Aye. Thank you. And we are adjourned to closed session. Thank you all.